Hi everyone, Andrea here with Crafts on the Move, popping in with a quick video on some tips and tricks featuring the DIY 2026 calendar Better Press plate from Spellbinders. I made a cute little 6-month calendar, and this calendar features the Spellbinders Ganache Gateau cake die set, and all the dies or all the cuts are from this set. Super cute to make. And then another item I found that is really cool is the Lawn Fawn heart tree set. This little heart stamp here fits perfectly around the numbers, and so here you can see I numbered number 17. So if you're making this calendar, these cute little calendars for a specific date, you can use a stamp set to highlight, or you can take your highlighter and highlight the number as well. As you see, this is 2025, so I'm in the process of changing out the 2025 calendars to 2026, so it can be reused year after year if you want. And then another helpful tool for this set is the DIY easel, and this is a lot of fun if you want to make these cards or make a calendar and then pop them up on this really cute paper card easel. So this die set cuts the pieces that you need to make this really sturdy die easel, and then I just place the card on top or in the brackets here so that the card can be displayed on a flat surface. So much fun. So another tip I wanted to go over is the actual calendar plates. So one thing that might be helpful, because the numbers are very small and hard to read, once you figure out what plate belongs to what month, on the back side, I wrote the month that it coordinates with a paint pen. So take your paint pen and you can either label it with the month or you can label it with the numbers. So I could do February or 2. And then that way, every time I reuse the plate, I don't have to look at a calendar to figure out what month it coordinates with. Now, there might be a couple of plates that coordinate with more than one month. So you'll just want to make sure, if that happens, that you leave room for both labels. But how handy is that trick? Next, I'm going to get into making a press. Most of the information I'm going to provide you is based on this really cute sample. And so the first thing that I'm going to show everybody is how to press the calendar portion. And what I did was I cut out quite a few white cardstock panels. This is 2 1/4 by 2 1/2. This allows you to press and then trim it down. That way, if this gets shifted a little bit, it allows you some space to trim it up. And then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to find the months that you're using. And I'm going to zoom in. So you're going to want to find your plates, the days of the week, and the month and the year, if that's how you're going to label your calendars. And what I did was I'm using the center line as my base point. So I will make sure that the plates, the month plates, line up with this line at the center point here. And then I am gonna do the days of the week at the top, and I'm gonna do the month and the year. So I'm making this for July, and I had previously done some presses, but what I would recommend is take one of your pre-cut 2 1/2 by 2 1/4 panels and do a test run to make sure that this is in line and that your tape is lined up. And so if you are going to do multiples, you can try and leave the tape in the space, and then all you actually have to do is tuck in the card. So I'll show you that in a second. So I'm going to ink this up with my black Better Press ink, and you just want to make sure that you don't shift the plates. And if you do, just realign them very carefully. You might want a little tool tweezers or some kind of a tool to shift it. That looks good. And then the other thing that you want to be cognizant about is your tape. I made a few and the tape was too high up and was actually blocking the full print, so that the number was actually printing on the tape instead of the image. So that's why I also recommend doing a couple test runs. But the other reason to do the test run is this will help you figure out if you need to have shims for your numbers, and it will also help you with the coating of the ink. I find sometimes it's kind of like a pancake sometimes, you know, that first pancake isn't the perfect one. You got to do the first one and then you get it right. The same with the press sometimes. Sometimes you need to do one or two for that ink to really attach to your plates. So once you get your item inked up or your plates inked up, you're going to take the cover and I'm going to put it down with the paper down and let these magnets clip in. I'm going to grab my machine and I'll be right back. One thing I want to mention before I roll this through the machine, and I didn't mention this earlier, is you need to be aware of where your paper is in relation to the grid line and to your plates. For example, I see that my plates are lined up exactly with that midpoint. If I line the paper up with the midpoint here, that will not give me wiggle room to trim the image if I want to trim it. And you might cut it a little close to the edge. And so this will allow for a little overhang. So I need to make sure every time I add this paper, while I'm using the setup that I currently have, that the paper needs to be shifted down just a little past that center line. So I'm just going to run this through my machine nice and slowly. Try not to press down on your cover plate when you're pulling it out, and then just carefully remove the cover plate, and let's check out our result. Gorgeous. Now all I need to do is trim down my calendar and it will be ready for the next project. All right, time to trim the calendar. I can tell the way I added the paper, it's a little bit, the calendar is a little bit more to the right, so I'm going to trim a little bit more on the left side. And I usually start between a 1/16 and an 1/8 of an inch. That looks even to me. And then I'm going to take a little bit off of the top. For this next part, I am going to show you how I set up my cinch machine for measuring the cut marks on the calendar. If you are not using your cinch machine for this part of the project, you can skip ahead. We are going to get into placing the punches on your project if you're making the calendar. And what I like to do is I start with a template piece of paper that is the length of where you're going to punch your holes. So this is 4 1/4 wide. What you want to do is look at your machine and read what the punch says per the inches of paper. So on this, the inches are at the top. My template is 4 1/4, so I'm going to go by 4 inches, and I'm going to pull peg number 8. And what that means is 8 is not going to punch down, so I'll have 7 holes in my top. And the next thing you're going to want to do is adjust your slider ruler. So this slides in and out. What I usually recommend is everybody try punching with the ruler in, and then you're going to want to pay attention to your left edge and see if you're going to keep it flush with this tab here or with your ruler. I always recommend using the tab. It just helps keep the paper straight. And so I'm going to ensure number 8 is pulled, and I have this closed, and this edge of my paper is flush with this tab, and I'm going to press down. And this is going to give me an idea of where I need to move my paper. So you can see there's a little bit more space over on the right. So I need to have the paper shift to the left a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this ruler 1/8 of an inch, and I'm going to pull it to the left 1/8 of an inch. I am then going to trim this off with my paper trimmer so I have a flush edge to start with. All right, I have my flush edge again. I have peg number 8 pulled, and I've shifted this ruler 1/8 of an inch. I'm still going to use this tab here as my guide, and so I'm going to take this edge where I want the cuts, and I'm going to slide it in and have the edge of the paper flush with this tab, and I'm going to press down on the machine, on the handle, and voila, I have what I want for my calendar. So there's pretty much equal amount of space on both sides of the very left and the very right peg. This is perfect. This is what I would use for this project, or any 4 1/4 inch project. So the other thing I would recommend, if you want, so that you don't have to redo this every time, is take a picture of your setup so that you can see what peg is pulled and where your ruler is at. And then you can also even write a note on here that you placed this left edge flush with the tab. Take a picture, label it 4 1/4 inch project, and then keep that. So the next time you do a 4 1/4 inch, you already have an image of how you need to set this up, and you don't have to go through configuring the measurements. I do always run one test punch first, just to make sure it's going to work. Every once in a while, stuff shifts, or you've pulled this out a little too far, and you just want to make sure that it is right. But if you have it set up right and you have an image, it will be easier to set up for the second one. So now we're going to get into making the cake. Now I'm going to show you how I made the cake part, and then next I will attach the cake to the panel along with the celebrations backside. I developed this cute little add-on as a download, and then that way, if you are using the calendars for birthdays, you can put the date and who the celebration is for. Can be used for retirements, all kinds of other celebrations. Next, I'm going to prepare the cake and then add the calendar to the prepared cake. Then I'll add the completed cake to the panel, which I went ahead and pre-cut for the cinch binding. And I will also glue this on. This is the what I'm putting on the back of each page so that I can take note of special occasions happening that month. So I'll put the date and then what the special occasion is or whose birthday it is. And then I'll have one cohesive calendar for the month. What I typically do is I start with my confetti or the circle die cuts, and I die cut 2 of each color, and I pick colors and then I randomly scatter them on my cake using my jewel picker. And then once I start adding these on, I will start to swap the confetti around on the cake to my liking. Once I get all the confetti on the cake the way I like it, I will then glue the pieces on. Once you get the spacing, another tip I want to share is you can go ahead and temporarily place where you think you're going to put your calendar. The reason I do this is because you might want to change your colors. So here I might switch this one no, this one I would switch to a blue. Perfect. And the reason being is because this calendar will hide some of your dots up. Now I'm going to just glue all the dots down. Once I get all the dots on the cake, I add double-sided foam adhesive to the back of both the icings, and I'm going to apply the icing to the cake. I applied stickles to the white icing die cuts and to the white circle confetti pieces on the cake. I did it the hard way and added the stickles before I actually glued the cake to the card panel, and I would have normally done it the other way. I would add the stickles after the cake is on the panel and then set it aside to dry. And then you can add the calendar and your toppings, or you can add all the pieces and then add the stickles at the very end and let it dry. What I have found is, depending on where those polka dots are on the cake, sometimes I can't get to them with the stickles. And so that's why I've been adding the stickles first, letting it dry, and then adding the calendar. That's all a personal preference and depends on how much time you have. I added the calendar to the cake with some 3D foam adhesive behind the calendar to pop it up from the cake to give it some extra dimension. While I wait for the stickles to dry, I'm going to go ahead and attach this card. And you can add the stickles after you add it to the cake to your card panel. It's really up to you. It's a personal preference on when you add those stickles and let them dry. After the stickles were dry, I added the cake to the panel using 3D foam tape, and then I added the toppings, and I went ahead and added the macarons on the top of this cake. The next step is to add the panels to your binding with your cinch machine, if that's what you're going to do. Another option is to cut this panel to 5.5 by 4.25. And as I had mentioned in one of the earlier sections, you can put it in this really fun easel. You can also put a magnet behind it if you don't want to have the celebrations. There's a lot of fun ways that you can use this. And then if you want, you can add this to a scrapbook layout as well. So just trim this off and put this panel on a scrapbook layout if you want to use it in a layout for a special occasion. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and have fun with your DIY 2026 calendar. Bye!